rain, and cold. From Washington, D.C., we've had a lot of references to the weather. I'm sure the Phoenix weather is going to get much better. But it was 77 and sunny in Washington over the weekend. It also had the highest pollen count in history yesterday. So I'm only mentioning this, forgive my voice, it is suffering a little bit from the pollen. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here today with all of you who play important roles in the airline industry. The industry has always played a big role in my life, and obviously an even bigger role over the last year. Before joining Airlines for America, we now call it A4A, Doug referenced that, I was a frequent traveler. My work required that I travel all over the country safely and quickly, and all over the world safely and quickly, oftentimes on very short notice. My circumstances certainly aren't unique or weren't unique. Every day, the U.S. airline industry transports 2 million passengers, 50,000 tons of cargo on over 25,000 flights safely and efficiently. Our mutual attachment to the industry is self-evident. We all make our living from it, right? I also don't have to tell you that the airline industry is one that has significant challenges. After our passenger carriers reported their 2011 financial results, A4A announced that the 12 airlines combined had made a profit of $239 million. That's a profit margin of 0.2%, less than a quarter of a penny for every dollar in revenue generated. A quarter of a penny. I don't think that's a profit margin that you're likely to be emulating on your side of the business, or at least I hope not. You know, it's no wonder that on the day my appointment to A4A was announced, the former chairman of the board of Citigroup, my former employer, Sherwin Bischoff, emailed me. He said, "Nick, I've always trusted your judgment. I read today that you are leaving the financial services industry for the airline industry. Shrewd move, question mark, question mark." If I had gotten that same question today, I would answer just as I did. Yes, I think it was, because I think like many of you, I see in my role here an opportunity to work with an industry that, while it has many challenges, as I said, on the one hand, it also has many opportunities on the other. So I want to talk about 3 W's. Where, what, and why. Pretty simple. Where the industry is today, and the state of the industry after 2 years in a row of profitability is still challenged. I often say it's at an inflection point. I want to talk about what we need to do going forward to put the U.S. industry on a more sustainable footing for our customers, our shareholders, and for the country and the economy. And perhaps most importantly, I want to talk about why that outcome is important to all of us, to the people we transport across the country and across the world, to the cargo we transport, and in terms of the U.S. economy and its competitiveness. It's something that's so critical to this country and a country of this geographic size and global importance, yet it's something that often gets lost in the policy discussion in Washington. Let's start with the state of the industry. Today, frankly because some of our own mistakes, but also because of extreme circumstances, in a 10-year period, the U.S. airline industry lost $55 billion and over 160,000 jobs, over 1/3 of its workforce. The industry has worked very hard to right itself, at least in matters that are within its control. The airlines have made good business decisions and stuck with them. Gone are the days of the price wars with fares as low as $9. They were suicidal pricing wars. Fares that gave consumers unrealistic expectations and a false sense of what it cost to fly them from city A to city B. Gone also are the thousands of extra seats that airlines used to dump into a market to stave off a competitor's market share creep. Common sense, or good business sense, and the economic law of supply and demand, particularly as it relates to capacity discipline and pricing your product to cover your costs, are prevailing right now. It's kind of a novel concept, covering your costs, but we're at it. Through wrenching restructurings, both in and out of court, the U.S. airlines have revamped their businesses and substantially lowered their controllable costs so that they have about the lowest unit costs in the world. And consumers today have many options. Consumers can choose what they value most in an airline or in the product and service offerings they want, which is creating consumer-driven revenue opportunities in what is still a starkly competitive industry. In other words, airlines are operating like any other business. And despite the deep cost cutting, the airlines are making improvements too, which sometimes I think don't get recognized. For example, U.S. Airlines reported the best performance ever in 2011 for key customer service metrics. The best on-time arrival rate for any fourth quarter in history, and the lowest ever recorded rates for the year in mishandled baggage and bumped passengers. That means that 99.7% of all passengers, and think of 2 million people a day flying and how many bags there are, arrived with their bags, and only 1 out of 12,000 passengers was bumped. That best ever trend has continued with the numbers that were just reported last Thursday for January 2012. Given the level of complexity and the uncontrollable variables inherent in airline operations, these levels of safety and service metrics are unheard of for any other industry that we can think of. Although I have to say that no other industry is required to report the kind of metrics that the airlines are, and neither are they subjected to the level of excessive government regulation, with commercial aviation now the most highly regulated, deregulated industry in this country. Let's talk a little bit about the government's action and what the impact can be. It's interesting at the same time that this excessive regulation that impacts business and job creation is being called into question in Washington. Airlines are continuing to be subjected to ever greater regulation, supposedly for the benefit of consumers, that in fact many times does not really benefit our customers and has unintended consequences. At the same time, little is being said, outside of us saying it, about the exorbitant taxes and fees that airlines and their passengers pay to the federal government. Let's look at some specific examples. In January, the Department of Transportation implemented a full fair price advertising rule. On its face, it sounds reasonable. Customers should know what they're paying for. If you're not familiar with the rule, airlines are required to display in an advertised price the base fare plus the taxes as a single price. In no other industry is the consumer price advertised or reported in that way. Not if you buy a car, not if you buy a house, not if you book a hotel room, a loaf of bread, or a pair of shoes. We support transparency and always have. Before you clicked to purchase, you always knew what your price was on your ticket. It's disingenuous at best that this new rule, which is touted as favoring the customer, actually favors the federal government. Now the government is able to hide the exorbitant taxes and fees in the price of the fare so that the airlines essentially get blamed for it. We oppose this game of hide the ball, quite obviously. You see the full price, but then you have to read small print to find out why you're actually paying that much money. And it hides the fact that for each ticket to Washington, for instance, your typical $300 round-trip ticket, your price will now be listed as $300. If you go down and find the small print somewhere below, you'll find out that $61 of that is federal taxes and fees, not the actual cost of the ticket. So, count me a cynic. The rule actually requires you to put it in smaller print and in a different location than where you list the price. I think it's the government trying to hide the fact of the taxes and fees because it'll make it easier to raise taxes and fees in the future. Then there's the tarmac delay rule. Certainly reasonable minds can differ about how long the plane should be on the tarmac, and no one should be stuck on an aircraft on a tarmac for such lengthy periods of time. In point of fact, few passengers were stuck for that long a period of time. So what we have now is a sledgehammer approach of a rule that even the government, through a Government Accountability Office study, says is having unintended consequences. More flight cancellations. More flights are being canceled due to anticipated delays caused by weather because airlines will opt for cancellation rather than take the risk of leaving the plane sitting there for over the 3-hour limit, because after that 3-hour limit is passed, they're fined, airlines are fined $27,500 per passenger. which comes out to about $4 million for a flight on your average Boeing 737. The domino effect of more cancellations is something you may have seen in airports. Sometime short of Christmas, I was in Dallas and our plane got canceled because of mechanical, and there were people standing in line whose flight, unlike mine, was not going to be out in a couple hours. It was going to be a couple of days because the flights were just not available and the seats were not available because of the capacity discipline that's being exercised in terms of pricing. So it's not a good situation. If you don't believe it, ask any pilot about their lack of discretion as you pump up against the 3-hour rule. So finally now we're facing a looming third consumer protection rule and a separate rulemaking that will require airlines to report revenue information related to 19 separate items, including how much they collect for meals, how much they collect for drinks, and how much they collect for upgrades, as examples. The rule would also require airlines to make all of their products available through global distribution systems. Again, this isn't required in any other industry. Amtrak does not report how much it charges or how much in some Cokes and hot dogs or in paninis. Cable companies don't report how much they make selling ESPN over HBO. And none of these industries have to provide their products and services to a global distribution system that's a duopoly that can then mark up the product for its own financial gain at the detriment of the consumer. Look, we partner with the federal government all the time, the Congress, our regulators, the administration. So I'm not saying that the administration, the regulators, and the Congress are out to ruin the U.S. airline industry. Although sometimes, through lack of coordination, lack of vision, and sometimes pure wrong-headedness, it seems like they are. So aside from the regulatory challenges, I want to touch briefly on the tax challenges, which I've already talked about some. Airlines and our passengers currently pay 17 separate federal taxes and fees. A group of 17 that's been thrown together over the years in a hodgepodge fashion without any guiding rationale and without any thought about impact on demand or affordability. Most recently, there have been attempts to have airlines and our passengers help reduce the federal deficit and/or pay for the payroll tax cut extension. Last year, and then again early this year, the Obama administration offered a proposal that would triple the security tax that you and I pay on each flight we take, and would also impose a $100 departure tax on airlines for each plane that took off in the United States. In the end, the proposals were rejected, but they're back already. We had about a 4-week hiatus on them. The White House budget proposal for fiscal year 2013 makes the same two proposals again. These two new tax proposals alone would cost the airline industry $36 billion over 10 years. It might be a good time, if you're a policymaker, to remind yourself of the fact that airlines have now made a profit for the first time in 2 years in a row in many, many years. And the profit last year was 0.2%. 2010 was a better year. The airlines collectively made a profit of about $2.7 billion, a number that is still dwarfed by the size of the potential tax increases. And to be fair, it's not just the administration. It appears that Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, a Republican congressman from Wisconsin, is chairman of the House Budget Committee for the Republican 2013 budget, is going to propose doubling the security tax on every flight segment. Any way you cut it, any increase for whatever purpose doesn't make sense if scrutinized in context. And that context is the state of the industry. It is at an inflection point. It's struggling for sustained profitability. And if you look at it further in the context of its importance to the U.S. economy and how any increase would affect passengers and demand, it really should not even be considered. There's too many other places to go. We're about the most heavily taxed industry in the country, more so than alcohol, more so than tobacco, and we all know, I'm not condemning those products, they're good, but they're taxed so that you don't use them, right? Anyway, so with that summary of where we are today, I'd like to take a look at where the industry needs to be and why it matters to everyone in this room and to America's future. The world around us is changing dramatically with important growth economies emerging outside of our borders. U.S. airlines provide the infrastructure. We like to call it the physical internet to get all of us together here today. I'm sure that most of you flew, probably not many of you drove. That's vital to the economic health and development of the United States. This industry very effectively connects America and connects America to the world. It supports over 10 million jobs in this country and over $1.3 trillion in economic activity every year. That's over 5% of the gross domestic product of this country. It rates number 3 behind energy and farming as the most important drivers of the economy in the United States. Other governments across the world get this and are treating commercial aviation differently. They're treating it as a strategic asset and as a key enabler of national economic development. They've been decisive about the role of their airlines, and it's putting us at a competitive disadvantage. As you all know well, far better than me, the orders and market for aircraft have changed dramatically in just the last 10 years. These changes reflect huge investments in the world's most important growth markets and investments in countries that are redefining models of aviation to drive new economic development and opportunities. The changes in leadership in commercial aviation are clearly reflected in the statistics on new aircraft on order and in the fleets operating today. Again, you know the numbers a lot better than I do. And although with the services many of you provide, aircraft financing transactions are not dependent on what necessarily are the most robust balance sheets, I think it's a given that if you have sustainably profitable U.S. industry, aircraft orders would increase. The international carriers who are buying the majority of planes today are providing the connectivity their governments envision. This includes flying to the United States in increasing numbers, to our major cities, which has caused U.S. carriers in some cases to pull down capacity in some international markets. And those markets, as you know, are the most profitable part of the business and are often used to subsidize routes domestically. As an example, today Emirates operates to Houston, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and Seattle, and just announced plans to expand to Washington, D.C. Etihad operates to New York and Chicago, and they start service to Washington Dulles next year as well. Also, Brazil's Gol has just announced plans to start service to Miami. We're not complaining about that. This is the free market at work. What we are saying is that it may be advantageous for you if you live in one of those cities, but maybe not if you live in another. So let's talk about what's at stake. These same foreign carriers are not going to directly service our smaller cities. They will quite rightfully pick the most profitable cities that they can serve that will enable them to use their own locales as hubs to move people around the world. It'll rely on us to provide the connectivity for those smaller communities and mid-sized cities. The U.S. networks have a vested interest in this. Our business model accommodates connecting every part of the country, again with the revenues from the more profitable segments subsidizing the less profitable ones. Even with the cut in the capacity, the cut in capacity over the last few years, has hit smaller and mid-sized communities hard, and it affects their local economies. And if you go to those smaller and mid-sized localities, they want all the airline service they can get because they know it means economic growth and they know it means jobs. So we're not asking for any special kind of deal. We don't want any kind of subsidies or anything else like that. We want to continue to provide such service, but we want to provide it on a more level playing field. We want to compete with our international competitors, but again, on a more level playing field. So our government can continue to ignore, and again, whether it's by negligence, whether it's by wrong-headedness, whether it's by lack of vision, I believe our government is ignoring the ramifications of what's happening in the U.S. airline industry, just as it did with the U.S. maritime industry, which led the world 30 years ago and now carries 1/10 of the tonnage that it used to, with no shipyards building ships in the United States. Or the government can do what it did with railroads in the 1970s, which was put them on the right footing through a rational tax and regulatory burden, as well as investment in infrastructure. So for all of these reasons, A4A has decided that our overarching strategy has to be to pursue a national airline policy, a holistic, comprehensive approach to putting the U.S. airline industry in the position to first survive and second to thrive in keeping with the fundamental role it plays in the U.S. economy. We have 5 core components that together form the basis of this national airline policy. First, reform our tax structure. Reduce the taxes on this industry and on our overburdened customers. Second, reform our regulatory environment. Ensure that rules are based on sound science and cost analysis, and eliminate rules that drive excessive costs or inefficiencies while doing nothing or little for safety for consumers. Third, fix the infrastructure, next gen. That's a topic for a different day. One of my biggest learning experiences when I took the job, I thought everybody's for next gen. Why isn't it happening? Well, we all know there are a lot of reasons it happens. It doesn't happen. But what we have to do is accelerate the deployment of the most cost-beneficial elements of next gen by implementing policies and procedures that are able to be used today. And there are a number of those, and we're working very hard at that with the FAA and with DOT. And we think we're going to show some progress this year. Fourth, enable global competitiveness. The industry needs to compete on a level playing field with global competitors. So we need to endorse global strategies that address issues that affect all of us, whether it be the EU emissions trading scheme, and then we need to put in place policies and resources that will up business and travel and tourism in this country, whether it be visas or other issues. And finally, mitigate fuel costs and volatility. We need the CFTC to follow its mandate and curb excessive speculation. As we all know, there's a difference between speculation, which exists in every market, and excessive speculation. And at the same time, we need to bolster domestic fuel production as well as the use of alternative fuels. And there are a number of programs in place to do just that. Look, this is a very significant list. It's a very complicated list. It's going to be a very hard job to try to put this in place. We're doing it on a retail level, policymaker to policymaker, to explain the state of the industry, and the state of ignorance about where the industry is today is pretty considerable. And I don't say that pejoratively. Complicated issues, people fly, they go to the airport, they get on a plane, they get where they want to go, all's good. Well, all's not so good over the long haul. So we're working with the Congress, we're working with the administration, we're going to try to get this done, because at the end of the day, having that kind of policy in place is what we need for the benefit of the country and for all of us. And with that, I'll happy to take questions and answers. I think Doug's going to come back up.